Hello everyone, and welcome to Twits Tuesdays at the TRU Library. We are gathered here on March 29th, Tuesday, and today we are going to be talking about the Makerspace, and in just a kind of like general machine-themed, I have brought us here to the Mechanists Guild, which we don't have a hydraulic press like that in the Makerspace, but yeah, this is where the Mechanist class is trained in Final Fantasy XIV. I'll get a little bit away from the machine noises, though, because, yeah. Mechanists are kind of like they're a ranged DPS class. They tend to use guns. They have a robot called Queen, which is kind of cool. I don't tend to play one all that much myself, but yeah, it's the Machinists class. A whole bunch of things there.
Artificer in D&D.
Kind of like an artificer, yeah. You have like bioblaster and a flamethrower and guns and an auto crossbow.
Okay.
You know, all the little like dynamite-y things you can put on enemies, drills, that sort of stuff. Whoop. Scholar. But yeah, I don't know, just wanted to wander around some like machiney places. In the setting here, Ishgard is kind of like it's the Japanese take on like a rural an medieval European fantasy setting, which is quite interesting. And in this society, the mechanists are actually considered to be kind of potentially socially subversive because of the ways in which the aristocracy is very much invested in knights and chivalrous codes, and having a gun in combat kind of changes that dynamic. So in the narrative, mechanists play this kind of subversive role, which I thought was kind of an interesting theme in terms of like what makerspaces are, and when we're talking about makerspaces. And I just noticed that poor unfortunate fellow right there who's hanging off the scaffolding. This is why you have safety rails. Oh my. Poor
Yeah,
fellow.
that's perfectly accurate too with crossbows. Crossbows came in. Let's just talk about history while we watch this guy dangle.
Yeah.
When we're first introduced, it was considered this terrible, dishonorable weapon. Now a peasant can kill a knight, and that disrupts the social order, which again goes back to makerspaces and their disruptive nature, especially when it comes to intellectual property law. Don't just print a Pikachu, please.
Yeah, that's a thing. The mouse will find you.
The mouse is always watching.
Always watching. But yeah, so that's just one location. But check my notes here. One thing also just to stress, like we pick topics to talk about, but if you ever want to drop into a chat and like ask research questions, that's always something that we're here for. So yeah, essentially the agenda for today is we just want to talk about the Makerspace a bit, what it is and what it isn't, some of the resources it has, while also just exploring some themes in the history of like, you know, science, technology, and while running the Smileton dungeon, which actually features some kind of 3D printing technology in it. And if we have time, we might run the Alexander raid, just because that's thematically kind of interesting in terms of kind of machines and society. Yeah, also, like on the topic of crossbows, they are really hard to like pull back. Like I once played around with one in Nova Scotia with a friend who was like studying archery and things, and like we have a sense that like bowmen or people who use bow and arrows, it's like a less physically demanding weapon, but like you need to have really intense upper body strength to pull those strings back. It's quite dramatic.
Yeah, a lot of the old ones, I got to fire one, and it had an 80-pound string, which is not unreasonable. That's a war bow. You can't be a war bow unless it's 70 pounds, and crossbows were often more than that.
Yeah.
And without a loading mechanism, it felt like my fingers nearly got severed in half pulling that string.
It's definitely true. My one of my family members helped train the Paralympic archery team back in the day, and he was really into archery, and he was talking about like in medieval like English graveyards, they can tell based on just bone structure who some of the archers were in that society because of like what it did to the bones in their arms, which was really dramatic. Anyway, that's not quite on topic, but just, fun fact in keeping with the Janet theme that we mentioned earlier.
You can't get me started on archery and then be like, no, we're not talking about archery.
There is a bowman class or an archer class as well. That's actually a bard.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So like you start off as an archer, and then when you move up in the world, you actually become a bard. So you can play musical instruments and while shooting things with arrows.
Need that upper body strength for the guitar, I guess.
To write and properly shred. But yeah. So I was just wondering here to talk a little bit about the Makerspace. It's new, it's just open. Its hours are from, and correct me if I'm wrong here, 10 till 3 Mondays to Fridays. And yeah, there's a website that I'm actually going to just throw down a link into in the Twitch chat here for folks. Oh hey, Wildly Average, welcome. I didn't see you there. Yeah, I don't know why I didn't notice that on my screen. Oh yes, I don't see it on my screen. We went over this last week. Well, welcome, Wildly Average. It's lovely to see you. So yeah, that is the main Makerspace website. It's still a work in progress, but there you will be able to see a number of the technologies that are available to you, some of which I'll go over. I'm also going to throw the Instagram address into the chat, because when it comes to a lot of the events that are being run there, they're starting to post it on their Instagram feed as well. So a few things about what the logic of the Makerspace is. All right. One of the things that they wanted to stress is that it's not really a print shop. You don't really go in there and ask them like, hey, can you 3D print me a miniature? It's more, the ethos of it is more kind of learning by doing. It is more like any other library space in that regard. The staff there are super friendly, super helpful. They will help get you started. And in fact, that website I shared, they're starting to load up kind of like getting started guides onto that as well. They will help get you started with the technology, but they won't do that stuff for you. It is part of kind of a learning experience. Yeah, it's also a place where you can actually make things as a group if you're part of a TRU student society. That's another thing that the folks there are really keen on collaborating with. So if you're head of any kind of student groups, you feel free to reach out to us or reach out to them for projects. I know, again, 3D printers are really big in D&D and tabletop role-playing spaces where you can print your own miniatures and whatnot. Actually, some of the local gaming stores here in Kamloops have 3D printers in them now, which is really kind of interesting.
Do we know if they're PLA or resin?
That is a good question that I do not have the answer to.
I think ours are PLA. So
okay.
If you are miniatures, it's not going to be quite as precise or smooth looking as if you were printing with resin. But it's very, very cool. You can still get quite a bit of detail, and you can mix and match and put crazy heads on your your planters and whatnot. That's what I've seen there mostly. They have a really cool partnership with all of the agriculture, I think it is.
That's right too. Yeah, it's true. They were making interesting planters. When you say planters, like pot plants. Yeah. So just to mention some of the technology they have. They have the 3D printing and scanning technology. They have computers with Blender, which those of you aren't familiar, that's actually a 3D modeling and animation program. I was actually just in there the other day when they developed, there was a student who was working on this really cool project where they'd actually taken a picture of a building in Kamloops from a whole bunch of different angles, and from those composite collection of pictures, they were increasingly rendering this real world building into a 3D environment using Blender on the computers at the Makerspace.
That's cool. That is cool.
Yeah. They have virtual reality headsets. They have a podcasting studio. In fact, I'm going to be releasing a little bit of an ad for Twitch Tuesdays that I recorded in that studio. Video recording equipment, sewing machines and embroidery machines, which they actually have when I say embroidery machines, I'm these are machines that can if you properly like load them up and set them up properly, you can actually take an image from the internet and have it embroidered onto cloth, which is pretty cool. It's like, it's not just like just like when you say embroidery machine, you don't necessarily know what that is. So it's actually quite a sophisticated piece of hardware they have there. They have Ozbots. I actually looked this up. Correct me if I'm wrong in the pronunciation. Cricket. There we go. How do words work again? Which is thank you for that. Which is actually an electric cutting machine, but it's like it can add. It's again. It's kind of like those really algorithmically intense machines where you can like etch and cut and like carve things into things with a great deal of precision by loading in preset programs, which is kind of cool. Scoring to things, rotary blades, all sorts of fancy stuff, plus button makers and Raspberry Pi. So yeah, there's a few things I wanted to talk about too. I'm going to just check the chat. Are you in the? Oh yeah, you're in the chat, Michelle. Oh, I should also imagine this is Michelle's voice. Welcome, Michelle. He didn't do that in a good time, but yes, we now have Michelle vocally with us as well as her presence in the text chat. And on that note, it's time to go to the only place uncorrupted by capitalism, the moon. Sorry, that's a.
We have a fourth person in the chat. I don't know who he is, or a fourth person watching, I should say.
That's a Command and Conquer reference. If those of you aren't familiar with the joke about going to the space. Pretty.
Oh, it is the moon. I thought it was just fully a joke.
No, I never entirely joke. But yeah, because this is where the Smileton dungeon is.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, and while I just kind of like meander around the moon though a little bit, I just wanted to talk a little bit about like what makerspaces are, kind of like their histories, right? I mean, there's been hobbyists and arts and crafts groups, shop classes, practical education stuff for ages and ages and ages. And when I was kind of just looking into it, the TRU library has a whole bunch of resources on like makerspaces, what they are, what they can be, their social kind of impacts. When I was looking through it, though, one thing that I thought was interesting that they didn't mention, at least the sources I saw, were the old 19th century mechanics institutes. This is kind of like an early British kind of like adult education program where they would kind of get together for like lectures and kind of like practical like trades and schools things like in a kind of like a collective way. And it was really interesting too, because these mechanic institutes, sometimes they were much more kind of conservative, kind of like, this is where we teach the working class the skills they need to perform, increasingly industrialized work, while telling them it's bad to rebel. But also some of these working class mechanics institutes were also quite radical. In fact, there was this whole kind of series of discussions with these mechanics institutes criticizing what was known as the British Association for the Advancement of Science, or the BAAS, where like the BAAS would often put on kind of like lectures showing off kind of what's new in the world of science and technology in the British Empire as part of this kind of empire building project. These are all the planets that are in Her Majesty's Empire, and these are like geological features of Her Majesty's Empire. And I forget, unfortunately I'm just quoting this off the top of my head. I remember one member of the Mechanics Institutes, like, in contrast to that, set up the Society for the Diffusion of Really Useful Knowledge and criticized the BAAS for, quote, trying to stop up our mouths with kangaroos. That in fact there weren't enough fun facts in the world to make up for the social inequalities in Victorian Britain. So there's always been kind of these kind of potentially like subversive, more radical kind of like elements to a lot of different makerspaces, even going back, I'd argue, to the 19th century. But modern makerspaces really, like, there were tool libraries and all sorts of things in the 1970s. But modern makerspaces is this kind of like, the term maker, right? Really started to come into the common discussion around 2005 with the publication of the Make magazine, just the word Make magazine. Which published information about like all sorts of different projects you could do, and later on it actually started helping to set up maker fairs specifically dedicated to makers coming together and sharing the cool stuff that they made. And I was first introduced to them. I don't know, Michelle, did you have much experience in maker spaces before this?
Yeah, I was on the board of a tool library.
Oh,
so that
cool.
was for a while, and it was great until COVID happened. And that's
Oh,
sort
not
of
so cool. Yeah.
had to happen in person, so it folded.
Oh.
Um, and then I did 3D printing stuff for Northern Lights and
Oh,
trained
cool.
managers. Had to do that while learning it myself,
Fair. That's
which is
often how it works.
with libraries, yeah. Um, so a bit. I really enjoyed them. Even when you don't know what's going on, that's kind of half the fun, and it is always a really neat culture
Hmm.
to be involved with. There are a lot of online maker groups that are again really culturally unique online and in-person spaces.
Yeah, right. I was actually first introduced to them when I was in Toronto with the Site 3 Makers Collective. And they were often running events and things there. There were a lot of really interesting crafters coming out of that space. At one point, they had this big project called the Heart Machine for like what's it called? Was it Nuit Blanche? It was like this big kind of like, I don't know if they have anything like in Kamloops, but a whole bunch of corporations sponsor kind of like dramatic public art during this period. I know they had something like it in Halifax too. But the Site 3 Maker Collective made this thing called the Heart Machine, which like you could put your hand on these paddles and it would like pick up your pulse rate, and this giant fiery machine would shoot off jets of flame corresponding to your pulse. Actually, it was really metal and also very metal. So like they did a lot. They did molded leather and just all kinds of stuff there. But they called it Site 3, right? Because these places sometimes struggle to like get off the ground because it was literally the group's third attempt to do that. So I think that's kind of like an interesting thing.
Yeah, that is my experience of that with the tool library. It's publicity is hard, all of that sort of thing. But again, the idea of making a heart machine that shoots fire, why would you do that? It's a lot of it is just don't ask what, because it's cool, because of the thrill of making something. And it's the thrill of making something that often leads to some of the best things that we have. I'm always reminded of oh my god, Michael Fassbender is stuck in my head now.
Oh.
I can't even remember the name later. But the Michael who did the stuff with the electro.
Need a bit more information than that, Michelle. Sorry.
Get there. Anyway, a woman came up to him after one of his demonstrations and said, this is cool, not in those words because it was ye olden times, but what's the point? And he said, Madam, you wouldn't look at a newborn baby and say, what's the point? And that feeling is very much alive in makerspaces.
That's a good point, yeah. So yeah, it's a place to experiment. Again, learning by doing is the order of the day. And like, I even just like learning more about it myself, and even the commercial I'm making for Twitch Tuesdays, like you learn a lot, and that's a really helpful. Like sometimes, I don't know about you, I can struggle to get motivated to learn a skill unless I have a project in mind for it, something I really want to do for a specific purpose. And I find makerspaces can be good for that.
It's Michael Faraday, by the way.
Oh, Faraday. Oh, wasn't it? Oh, Faraday. Okay, yes. History of science, electric stuff. Yes. Wasn't it Faraday was like, like they were talking about like electrical inventions, and they're like, like what does this mean? And they're like, I don't know, sir, but whatever it is, I'm sure you'll be able to tax it. Was that also a Faraday quote? But yeah.
Neat guy.
Yeah. It's also interesting too, right? Because Faraday was one of the few people in that time period in the history of science who actually did come from a humbler social background. If I remember correctly, it's been a while since I've talked about Faraday.
I think
so.
My experience on this is listening to my dad talk about him, and so the rebooting of I'm losing it. Cosmos.
Oh,
They had
okay,
an
yes.
episode on Faraday.
Okay, yeah. Stuff. So yeah, I haven't just brought you to the moon because like it's pretty. I also brought you to the moon because look at this face. Now, this is kind of an odd face. It's also where the dungeon is that we're going to. But one of the things about the moon in the Final Fantasy series is that it is often populated by rabbits. This is not a natural history of our world. This is just Final Fantasy spaces. And why might that be the case? Does anyone have a sense of why the moon might have rabbits on it in the Japanese game?
I'll let the chat answer. Come on, chat. It's the same reason that Sailor Moon is named whatever it is. That's the Japanese word for rabbit.
I thought it was Tsukino or something was her last name, but
her first name.
Oh, her first name.
Because her rabbit.
So wait, so like her name's translation is Rabbit Moon Rabbit, because
yeah.
Okay, fair. Not seeing any answers in the chat. So yeah, Michelle, why do you think there might be rabbits living on the moon in this world?
Religious studies win!
Huzzah!
Because there are many Eastern myths about rabbits on the moon.
And in fact, like not just that, but like when they look up at the moon, it looks like there's a rabbit in it that's kind of curled around. It actually features prominently in the video game To the Moon as well, and I think there's actually some South American beliefs as well that feature a rabbit in the moon. But also, yeah, so unlike in like European stories, right, there's a man in the moon. Though there is kind of also a man on the moon in this moon, because there's that face there. But, oh, no worries. But yeah, right? Also, I do, part of me wonders, like, there was a big hullabaloo back several years ago now. Did you hear about the face on Mars?
No, I heard about people saying there was a pyramid there, which I think was a very well-cornered mountain.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, it's somewhat of a similar thing, right? There's a concept, human beings are kind of hardwired to see faces in things. The term for that is pareidolia, I think. Pareidolia? And yeah, there's like us then like, oh, there's a face on the Mars. It means that it's like that they're sentient and they're there. But like, no, it's a thing that a human mind would think of as a face.
And that goes to, again, even if there is life on Mars, I don't overly expect it to have a human-looking face.
Sweet, Star Trek isn't an accurate depiction of the future, but
I would love for it to be.
All right, well, let's go into this face and actually run the dungeon, shall we? So yeah, this dungeon, just a bit of the setting. These rabbits on the moon were set up, I guess, Endbringers, or come on, Ben. Endwalker, spoilers ahead. The rabbits on the moon were set up to kind of like create this like arc because there's a disaster happening on the main planet, and they were trying to make it ultimately like ideally habitable to the inhabitants of Aetheris, or the main world. But things go wrong. Half of science fiction is like, but what if technology this goes haywire? That's kind of the story here as well. Smileton. I'll read the description here. Smileton was to be a paradise for the people of Aetheris, a refuge where every need is met, its inhabitants content and happy for all their days. But what is happiness? In pursuit of an answer, the Loporrits, that's the rabbit people, created the Big Cheese, designed to make manifest all they might need and more to fulfill the needs of their passengers to be. They were eager to please, perhaps too eager, and their plans became more fickle, each new idea a betrayal of the last. The Big Cheese now burrows towards the center of the moon, a labyrinth of contradictions left in its wake. If left unchecked, its wanton pursuit of happiness may very well spell the end of the moon. So, when you program machines, they will give you what you want, and however you set your parameters, that can affect the outcomes that you get. So yeah, so it's going to be kind of like Escher-like. Oh yeah, we're popping right into there. Oh, I should summon my fairy. All right, here he goes. Okay, Michelle, I'm going to need to do a bit of concentrating to keep my party alive. Let's do this.
All right. And if things are going badly, I'll just narrate their death. It'll be great.
Huzzah! Teamwork. It's kind of Escher-like for the main section. Like this was all like 3D printed weirdly. Ooh. Impossible architecture. Nope. Where's everyone else going? The door's here. Whee. And it's got funky music. Alright, gotta catch up to the tank. Let's do this.
DPS guys never appreciate the need to stay in range of your support classes.
Yeah, there is that. Well, the tank logic in the game is kind of like wall-to-wall pulls. They just run until they can't run any longer. Which, like, I understand, but sometimes gives me a heart attack. You know, some people might just say, get good, and to which I respond, no. Alrighty.
Are you kind of invisible as you're being yeeted between these places,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
am I? Okay, I'm not just fully losing track of you.
No, I'm invisible. It's kind of Portal logic.
Okay. This looks like what happens if you don't clear a block in the 3D printer.
And the 3D printers have come a long way. I remember a friend of mine was working on his, and like he was just trying to make a magnetic knife block, and it more or less worked, but it ended up like having almost like a physical clipping error. Like there was just this one section of it that was janky and jutting out. Which is kind of like this, except, you know, to another level of fantasticalness. Oh, I
think ours, they're quite good. They don't tend to do that. You just have to be careful of jams. But you might get something odd if you're not careful with the digitizer.
Ah, I see. Alrighty, first boss. It's a face. Oh, which one do I want? Oh, alright. Oh, I think that's how I do. Even odd.
When I was visiting the lab and Frank was showing me around, Frank is our Makerspace librarian, by the way, and he would talk to anyone who's in the chat.
Yeah.
He was showing me the most recent things that had been digitized, and there was a fellow who was currently working on recording music at that moment because he had digitized a version of an ocarina, and then and he moved it around a little bit, personalized it to see what he can do. So he now has his very own ocarina, and it really does look a lot like Link's.
Yeah. So it's from the Ocarina of Time, the old N64 game.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of really interesting projects you can do in the Makerspace.
Yeah, so I throw that out there so people don't think, oh, it's just computer science, or oh, it's just people in design or modeling. You've got music. Even with podcasting, I'm even encouraging some of our people from law to go because they're looking at different ways of disseminating.
Oh yeah, it's a great way to communicate ideas. Like, it does require some technical skill, but it's like, I mean, this we're in the golden age of podcasting and like video essays and all sorts of things.
Also, sometimes you really have to find creative ways to make law interesting.
I mean, you say that, but like, yes, it can be very dry, but also, unfortunately, it's kind of like how our world works. Do you know Lud in the Mist, Michelle? The novel Lud in the Mist? It's 19th century stuff.
Oh.
It was written by Hope Merlees, who is actually buried in Glasgow. I know that because I stumbled on her grave accidentally when I was exploring graves, which is something I do for fun because I'm that kind of person. But it's really interesting because it kind of juxtaposes Fey magic, and like this is Fey, like kind of like Land of the Dead Fey almost, to human law. And they're like, the Fey control reality with magic like humans try to control reality with law. And so part of it is specifically a reflection on, like the weirdness of like legal fictions becoming realities.
That is really interesting, especially as you say, legal fictions like the personhood of corporations.
Indeed.
And I mean, if you make it a law to some degree, you do make it reality. And it's also something I remember...
Oh no, that was the wrong person. Sorry. Yep, please continue.
Something I remember talking about with the other nerdy folks in law school, thinking, now if we got sucked into fairy, though, we'd be fine. We've taken...
Mm-hmm. All the very particular ways about like names and naming of things, you know. Yeah. Tumblr loves talking about fairies and fairy logic and fairy contracts, incidentally. They're like, it's never give someone your name if they ask you, like, may I have your name? Because then they will take it from you. You know, like, you cannot have it, but my name is. All those sorts of things.
It could have just been really thinking about the future there. That is more or less the internet.
Yeah. Alrighty. Yeah, no, so legal things. And yeah, so like I know there's a lot of like intersections of like copyright law and 3D printers. I know a colleague of mine actually did some work on the legal ramifications of like, you know, weapons being made and guns and stuff being 3D printed and what that does. And like, you know, and the whole like, you know, those anti-piracy ads are like, you wouldn't steal a car. Well, like, what if you could download a car?
That is okay from a philosophical perspective as opposed to from a legal perspective.
Oh, yeah.
I do think there's a difference between stealing a car and downloading.
Oh yeah, it's about scarcity, right? I mean, like, you know, not to be too radical on Maine, but like capitalism thrives on artificial scarcity, and a lot of digital products, that's not the logic they really operate under. They have to be artificially made scarce.
Well, that's the thing. If you steal a car, it's a zero-sum game. So you gain and someone else loses because you took a physical object that they now no longer have access to. If you download something, you made a copy of it. So the owner still has the original. And proving damages in those cases is unique. It's a little bit different from proving damages in the case where you stole a car, because then it's obvious the damages are the value of the car. In the case of intellectual property theft by means of copying and using something you shouldn't have. Generally,
the printed workers, like, these guys are 3D printed. That's why they have that kind of like janky quality about them. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Just before this guy goes down, I wanted to say,
it's printed with resin. That's some PLD.
Sorry, just wanted to point that out before the guy goes down.
That is cool. But you have to prove basically that the vendor lost the value of the same.
Yeah.
And so that's where remixing makes things really tricky in the IP and copyright world, because I was not going to purchase a Pikachu with a Harry Potter hat wearing a third IP thing.
Yeah. Oh my, where are we going here?
Because that product doesn't exist. But you still violated intellectual property law with the whole Pikachu. So it's the remix aspect is very interesting for big law nerds like me.
Yeah. And just remix culture in general is really kind of interesting, because it's like you need to have space for creativity. That's why there's a lot of places online where you can get like royalty-free music and stuff to just experiment and play around with things.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how old everyone here is, but back in the ye olden days of fan fiction, Anne
Rice
fans, the Anne Rice of the world, Anne Rice's fans were very scared to engage with the work that way, because Anne Rice was suing anyone who...
Yeah, very litigious.
Very litigious.
Let's see, let it go, it's printing our pathway. Sorry, just...
Oh no, I'm just on I'm on an intellectual property rant more now. But I do think, remixes that you make in a makerspace context are kind of similar to fan fiction, because again, I wasn't going to go out and buy an Obi-Wan Kenobi teams up with Jango Fett fan fiction. You know? There aren't to that.
Yeah. So it can still be a space of creativity, and because, I mean, corporations own so much of our culture, it's kind of hard not to have something with cultural salience that doesn't reference those things. You know, I mean, I say this is, you know, someone running a Twitch stream in Final Fantasy XIV. It's, you know, someone else's intellectual property, but Twitch as a platform exists in part because of the ways in which fan use of material is recognized to support that material.
Yes, and we do have... always get it confused because in the US we have one and in Canada we have the other, but fair use and fair dealing. I won't get into that now. Come talk to me in my office or send me an email if you wanted to see differences between fair use and fair dealing. But there are some limited ways that violate copyright. It's not violating copyright because it's an exception. Yes, it's not a defense, it's just not a violation.
Huzzah!
Huzzah!
Technicality! I mean, the law's about that. Lots of, as I understand it, lots of technicalities.
Oh boy. It's all we do.
There we go.
So what is this thing you're fighting now? With the,
tentacles?
Yeah.
A regolith? I don't know what a regolith is. I don't know how this is a depiction of machines or molded plasticky things. Not entirely sure there.
You can say that's one of the planters they've printed out.
Yeah, look at all the 3D printing is the part of it. Okay. Time to fight the giant rabbit robot. And you can see in the background there, it's actually taking that matter and reforming it into these, well, in this case, bombs it's going to drop our way.
Oh-hoo!
That's what the laser is there for. It's like, oh my,
I'm trying to see a rabbit. I'm just seeing a frog.
Oh, you know, like the little eyes and the ears up there?
Oh, okay, there are multiple rabbits. I was looking one down.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow, you're right. There is a frog beneath the rabbit. It has layers. It's a complicated metaphor.
Yes. But we're talking about remixing.
Yeah.
Why not stick 5 bunnies on a frog?
Pardon me. That also depends if you're just doing it in an artistic sense or in a GMO sense.
Yeah.
Context matters.
No animal testing issues in the makerspace.
Nope.
Do you want to explain what Raspberry Pi is?
If you'd like to explain that, please, by all means, go for it.
I can't.
Oh, sorry, you were asking me if I wanted to.
Yeah.
As I understand it, Raspberry Pi is... Oh, God. Sorry. Raspberry Pi are these kind of like little modules on circuits to kind of help you kind of like get a more intuitive sense of how to like program and code machines. And so it's kind of like... think of it as like really kind of like next level Lego in some ways.
Okay.
If that helps.
I do remember one of the directors of the libraries up in Northern Lights was telling me her 11-year-old got a Raspberry Pi and basically turned it into an old Game Boy.
Oh, yeah. It has a lot of, flexibility. Ouch,
Yeah.
ouch, ouch, ouch. Which one do I forget which button I'm using here.
Try the heal button.
They're almost all heal buttons of various kinds, but thank you.
I'm helping.
Almost done. There we go. Oof. Give some more player commendation. And roll for loot. Because, yeah. So yeah. So that was the Smileton dungeon. Now, the thing is, the 3D printers... I guess all the 3D equipment disappears. That was a load-bearing boss. All the 3D equipment disappears after the boss is defeated. I'm also just going to throw down in chat, because like the 3D printers you saw here in this dungeon aren't really quite like the 3D printers in our makerspace. But it does reflect 3D printing technology that I'm just going to drop in the chat about metals. In fact, there was a lot of like hubbub there a few years ago about 3D printing metal bridges in Amsterdam over the canals, and like this particular hatching and whatnot you also see in some of the kind of like those metal or like furniture design spaces. So I just uploaded a video of the person behind that project in the chat. And actually, while I'm at it, I might as well throw in a timeline of makerspaces in there as well if people are curious. Alright, I'm gonna get out of here. Yeah, just checking in. Want to see how folks are doing. They take us to Idleshire. Because I think we have time to run Alexander. If I can even remember where. Come on, there we go.
15 minutes.
Sorry? Yeah, oh yeah. How are folks holding up there in the chat?
Lurkin.
That's fine. Like I said, we are pro-lurker. So, I wanted to talk about Alexander. I mean, it's kind of slightly tangential, but I feel like if you've been coming here, you're kind of here for some of the tangential discussions. The way we think about like machines and kind of machines' relationship to like, well, again, the reality that we live in. Alexander is a really interesting creature in Final Fantasy lore. He was first introduced in Final Fantasy VI, or back in my day, Final Fantasy VI was Final Fantasy III, because of dating issues. Where is he? He's the giant thing right there. But essentially, it was this notion of this holy machine, and not just holy machine, and like it was almost like a cathedral golem, basically. This big old bad boy here. And increasingly, and again, there's some Heavensward's raid spoilers here. Alexander in Final Fantasy XIV isn't just this kind of like cathedral-like holy machine, but specifically it's this holy machine that has a relationship to the nature of time. That in fact this is a kind of like a time travel machine. Watching Bunny Frog die. Good stuff. But this kind of like holy machine that has a relationship to time. And this is kind of interesting because this really made me think of like kind of like 18th century discussions about if we live in a purely mechanical universe, right? There's this movement called deism, which is kind of like a belief that like, okay, God created the world. This is again in a European Christian context. God created the world, but he made it according to specific natural laws. And basically, he just got it started, and it's going to start just running and doing its own thing based on its own internal logic, the kind of clockwork universe, that all of the parts are interrelated. And because of this, even though he was more of a secular thinker in some ways, this French fellow, Pierre Simon Laplace, came up with this idea of like, well, if that is the case, then if you had a great enough intelligence, it would be able to just compute backwards and forwards everything that has happened and will happen, and contained within like the one moment in those natural laws. Right? He says, we may regard the present state of the universe as the effect of its past and the cause of its future, an intellect which at a certain moment would know all forces that set nature in motion and all positions of all items of which nature is composed. If this intellect were also vast enough to submit these data to analysis, it would embrace in a single formula the movements of the greatest bodies of the universe and those of the tiniest atom. For such an intellect, nothing would be uncertain, and the future, just like the past, would be present before its eyes. This is from his philosophical essay on probabilities. And so this is what Alexander kind of is. It's this giant world computing mech. But in the lore of the game, its existence is a one thing that kind of messes up and complicates its ability to actually process all of that. So ultimately, what it decides to do for the safety of the world is encapsulate itself in this time bubble. But it's kind of like a force of nature in a lot of ways, and at various times, because it's, a video game, you have to fight it. So yeah, I know. I just thought that was kind of a cool thing, right? Like, it gets more complicated in the 19th century because then you start adding thermodynamics to it, right? Like, in principle, in a purely Newtonian mechanical world, you can run that thing backwards and forwards, and there's no like laws of nature saying that like it's going to ever run down in that way. But once you throw thermodynamics into the mix, and it has kind of like a time and a directionality, that changes the way in which kind of the theological discussion related to the natural philosophical one, well, still kind of, I'm going here.
I do like that this game can stop and get very smart and then again just throw you back into, and now we punch it. Yeah.
I mean, that's what balance is all about, right? A balanced media diet. So yeah, we'll just run into this one. This is the soul of the creator. Like, Alexander's, like, this whole machine, you go all the way through it. It's quite a long series of things. I won't read out the whole thing because we're running kind of low on time. But talk about time. Oh, let's see. Okay. Oh, I should have done. So wait time in less than 5 minutes. This is a bit more of an esoteric dungeon or like raid instance. Also, like, if it's the music I'm thinking of, it's really cool music. Final Fantasy XIV was in the Guinness Book of World Records for having the most musical scores composed for a single video game.
Really?
There's a lot of different music and quite varied in the game. And they particularly show it off oftentimes in a lot of these trials and events. Whereas like the ambient kind of going around the world music is, well, ambient.
It is very different from the video games I've played, in which, they got a composer to do like one major background score, and then if you go to the underwater levels, you get something different.
Oh yeah. No, I like the Squaresoft in general. I know other folks are big Squaresoft fans, but like they have a long history of putting a lot of thought into their music and celebrating that. And yeah, I've always loved that aspect of the game. Oh, sorry, Square Enix. Again, I'm dating myself. Squeenix, they call it now. Well, no, not officially, but this is a different dungeon, and I'm thinking if people are interested, since we talked about machines a lot today, maybe next week, people might be interested in talking more about plants and the natural world and kind of like agricultural factors and stuff.
Ooh.
If there's curiosity, and we can geek out about things there too. Plants, giant robot. Again, balance.
Well, that's what they do in the makerspace too, right? What we were talking about is even though you can go very techy, very advanced with it, it's also, are you a green thumb? There are projects there for you. It is the mixing of the natural and the mechanical very well.
Yeah. Not necessarily they're not necessarily at odds with each other. Modern industrial agriculture kind of is, but not intrinsically so. In fact, it reminds me of like a lot of indigenous permaculture practices, right? I mean, when the colonizers came, they thought that it was just utopia in North America because everything nature just seemed to provide, but what they were seeing was actually like a great deal of thought that was put into cultivating the natural environment in a way that would support human life. In fact, there's a really interesting book that's an indigenous/environmental history called As Long as Grass Grows, which talks about a lot of intersections of environmentalism as a movement and the indigenous rights issues. Which, if you're interested in that, you can get audiobooks of it and all sorts, but actually talks about a bit of those dimensions.
I'm probably going to ask you about that some more tomorrow.
I'm happy to. I have actually MP3s. I could use Libro FM, which actually you buy the MP3s from them, and you're allowed to share them, which is pretty cool. And it supports more like the actual it's a kind of a more socially just, give more money to authors, Audible.
Oh, that would be nice, and it also does take into account the fact that if you buy a print book, you often share it with your friends.
Exactly.
Which is something, even if you were to buy a CD, which I don't anymore because my computer doesn't have an optic drive now.
Oh, don't. That's a shame. Like, I want to get one for my desktop because
I know. I bought this really great CD pack because it had this fantastic artwork and storytelling on it. But and then I had to use my brother's computer to convert it.
Oh my, yeah.
But you share music that's physical. You share
Mhm.
books that are physical, and a lot of things that are happening in libraries with publishers are moving
Mhm.
away from the model, saying things like, "Oh well, a book's going to run out after 2 years because it's going to break, so we'll charge you again.
Mhm.
However, we're going to make it so you can't share like you would with a physical book."
Yeah, no, that's a definitely like in terms of like again legal issues in libraries, the way we share, yeah, the way we share digital resources and like digital rights management and that sort of thing is very fraught. And in fact, like if anyone follows kind of the politics of libraries, librarians and publishers, much like authors and publishers, are kind of at loggerheads a lot of the time.
Oh, they always use authors to try to get the public on their side, and then they don't mention that Elsevier has a 3,000% profit margin. That sounds like a hyperbole. It's not, because their academic
Mhm.
authors are
Yeah,
literally not paid.
yeah. I think there's I don't there's a documentary on Netflix called Paywalled, which is actually about that. If you're familiar with
I'm not, but I should watch it and stop ranting at people, especially
it.
while we're recording.
You know, it's incriminating, but also educational. And you know, that, again, balance. That's a balance I kind of like to go for.
It's the library Twitch stream. It was gonna happen.
All the spiciest of takes. Yeah, yeah. Come on, cue me up. It's always hard to kind of judge how long these queue times will be, even when I am playing a healer. But it says the average time is less than 5 minutes. Let me in. Boof.
The average time is less than 5 minutes, and yet time elapsed over 5 minutes.
Yep. Now, you can't actually die this, but like, where will I land? Oh, okay, no, sometimes. Some things, like, unlike World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy XIV doesn't let you just jump off of everything. World of Warcraft would let me go over this ledge. I don't know which one's kinder in that regard. So, boop. Oh yeah, this mount, just big, funny arms. That's the thing too, right? Anything in Final Fantasy XIV, if you can ride it, you can fly around on it. It doesn't matter if it doesn't make sense that it could fly. I'm just flying on a giant flaming yeti, you know, living the dream.
That is the dream.
Well, if this takes too long, I might have to cancel the mission. Oh, I mean, I guess there's only a few of us in the chat. If folks don't mind waiting, round it off with a dramatic battle against a machine god. You know, it's a good nightcap. Not hurting you. I'm glad.
I mean, the students in the library, every time they poke their head in, are wondering why the librarian has video games on the screen.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Librarians are people too, folks, and we're also statistically likely to be nerds. It's you know, don't want to like lean. Well, no, I do want to lean into the stereotype in that regard because, true. Alrighty, let's see if this has the good music. Oh no, it's not the song I was thinking of. Oh well. Yeah, no, there's a much cooler song at the start of the whole Alexander run. We're waiting for the raid leader to get started. There you go. Baggy Kestrel.
You love the names some people choose.
Mega holy. That doesn't seem like it's a good thing. Let's throw down a shield for that.
Okay, so we were outside the robot, and now we're inside the robot. Is this like its brain?
It's... I don't fully understand that myself. It's all Alexander. It's Alexander all the way down, unlike Rabbit Frog, which is a mix of rabbits and frogs all the way down.
This feels like, what's that movie? If that's enough information. You go inside the kid's head, you've got anger and joy.
Oh wow. Yeah, that movie.
That movie. Is it Inside Out?
That sounds about right.
Yeah. This just seems like we went inside Alexander's. There we go. Thank you, Wildly Average.
There we go. Yes, thank you. Uh-huh.
Except they're all anger because they all want to kill you.
Uh-huh. And I think that like that particular portaling thing is that it's bringing in things from other times, like machines from other time periods with the like weird gear clockwork effect. Yet they're all like mecha cathedrals, like. Oh, getting bigger. There we go. There's the big one.
Oh!
Hello, friend. Oh yeah, this is the one where if the tank doesn't use the limit break at the right time, we all die.
Oh!
5 seconds. There we go. I'm just gonna say a ritual prayer.
This has major Baylor vibes.
Whoa.
For anyone who also had to read the Book of the Conquerors undergrad, probably not very many people.
The which ones? I'm not sure what that is.
Oh, it's the mythological history of Ireland.
Oh, interesting. No, I have not.
Yeah, so, you know, the...
you see, he's frozen time on us.
Oh, God. You got the Firbolg. I think there are 5 ways of conquering, but the one that it's focused on is
Oh, face. Sorry, yes, please continue.
and then the Tooth of Daedanon show up, and they have to battle the Firbolg, and one of them is Baylor, and he's a giant with one eye, and when they open his eye, and I say they, because they have to, like, hook the lid and pull it up. It's very scary. And everything that he looks at just is Dunes. I always pictured it as a giant laser eye.
Okay, good stuff.
Yeah. Very major Baylor vibes, except that this also has wings, which is... I mean, it's the right number for Old Testament angels.
Oh, there's wingier beings in this world. You haven't even seen the wingiest. Oh, my face, I need that to live. That is true. Lots of emotions can get you dead, says Wildly Average. Oh, you love your raid-wide damage. Time gate. That can't be fun.
I'm going to have to drop out of voice because
Alrighty.
my phone is going to die. But I will still chat.
Okay, we're almost done. Well,
There,
yeah.
in the last 3 minutes that we're on.
Lovely hearing ya. Alrighty. Mega Horde. Yeah, so this wasn't the coolest music that I thought. But this is the final form of Alexander. Oh. I think that was a win, or was that a loss? Oh, that was a loss. We died. I don't even understand what happened, but sometimes yeah, that happens. Whew. Oh, we needed to go in those portals. Yeah, like some of these more like upper tier raid bosses, you gotta coordinate effectively. But if it's a pickup group, you don't always have people coordinating. Sometimes they run Twitch streams and aren't fully paying attention. Let us go. That's the thing, when Michelle's in the chat, I'm less likely to just kind of hum along to the music. Oh no, my ferry! I need to bring my ferry back. Alright, try not to get... Actually, yeah, Michelle, if you want to sometimes talk about like religious studies stuff, like there's a lot of stuff we could explore here. Hey, no, I mean, like, if anything else, the library is a good place to geek out in about, like, if you have a special interest or a topic that you love talking about, we are, or at least I know I personally am happy to chat about it. I once listened to a colleague spend an hour talking about the history of the Montreal Underground system, the trains, because that was just something that they were really, really into. Yep. I'm still a little disappointed that the music isn't as cool as the one I was thinking of, but... Oh yeah, definitely. Enthusiasm is contagious. I mean, again, that's why, you know, YouTube video essays are such a thing, because people just like... it's hard not to be intimidated by that, sorry. People just like listening to, yeah, enthusiastic people talk about cool things. Not even necessarily cool things, like Noah Caldwell Gervais is a video game essayist, and like, I will even listen to him talk about cars, which I'm not generally interested in, because I think Noah talks about things in an interesting way. Right? Yeah. Oh yeah. I've always enjoyed Wildly Average talking about their plans and projects. Oh, come on, stack. Oh. Emperor. I like that the music kind of slows down and gets distorted during these moments. Even if he is wrecking us. At least he's doing it artistically. Oh, why do I keep on running into that? Oh, okay, let's see, new plan. Where's all my area of effect heals? Oop. Field. Let's listen to Lindy Beige? Oh, never heard that one. Oop, alright. I don't know about medieval what's the term for that? Not coinistry. Numismatrix or something like that. I do know that Isaac Newton was like went out of his way to get counterfeiters executed, but that's like Newton was a little bit intense when it came to currency. Okay, they're going to the portals, so hopefully, with enough DPS in the portals, we can do this. I sometimes get complacent in these older raid bosses because, like, they are, like, objectively easier than they were when they were first launched. But that still means, like, a lot of them still have instant kill things that you have to really pay attention to. Alrighty, I think... Oh, where's our guy? People in the portals? Alright, okay, people are out of the portals. We cleared that damage check, or DPS check. Let's try to make sure the tank doesn't go down. A dead tank is no good for anybody. Ow. Okay, that person's glamour is on point. Ah! Oh, hello again, friend. I don't trust that. It's so long I forget what even happens here. Oh, speaking of the lasers, Heidi? I don't know what this means, but I don't like the look of it. Oh, there we go again. Ow. Yeah, he's almost down though. Okay. Oh, but our tank is down too. Oh, and I got hit in the face. Oh no, everything's getting complicated. Come on, limit break. There we go. Huzzah! Whew. Drama. Fair accommodation to the other healer because they're definitely Oh, hey, a Toy Alexander. I want a Toy Alexander. I'll risk. You can get little just like action figures. Like again, like, you know, oh, you just beat a machine god. Would you like an action figure of that machine god? They kind of know how gamers think. Did I get the little Toy Alexander? I did! Little Toy Alexander for me! There we go. Alrighty, everyone. Well, thank you so much for coming out to Twits Tuesdays at the TRU Library. It's been lovely having you here. As always, I'll be posting a video of this to YouTube after parsing a little bit. Again, feel free to check out the Makerspace. We're happy to have you there. And I look forward to chatting with you next week. Have a lovely evening.